Michael Shrimpton, welcome to the Ad Hoc Basis studio. It's where we do a lot of things. And you have published the third edition of some obscure novel about some completely unknown intelligence agency, which is just the subject of conspiracy theories or some other thing or other. However, I see you've reached the third edition of this.
Yes.
So can you tell us about how you got to a third edition by really explaining what the heck this DVD thing is?
Well, yes. This is the book. This is the third edition of Spyhunter, The Secret History of German Intelligence. The book was published in 2014. It went to a second edition quite quickly. The government were desperate to suppress publication, or to be more precise, the Cabinet Secretary of the day was desperate to suppress publication. That was Sir Jeremy Hayward. He was a traitor reporting to the director of GO2, the DVD's operation in London, and he ordered police to seize all the backup copies of the book and my laptop and my working, basically my working copy. That was in 2012. Fortunately, I had anticipated an attempt to suppress publication, and the book was backed up in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. And we eventually were able to get it published in 2014, although it was a bit of a battle. In those days, you couldn't. It was backed up in PDF, and in those days, it was very difficult to translate PDF into Word. It was a frustrating exercise. And the book was originally written in American. That's because the first publishers were going to be the United States Naval Institute, who had published Tom Clancy's first novel, The Hunt for Red October. I was a member, and I was known to USNI, and I'd cut a deal with a very nice Marine general who was then the chief executive. But by the time the book was ready to be published, he'd retired, and the incoming admiral was, I think, fairly close to the Obama administration. At any rate, USNI pulled out, and the book had to be retranslated from American back into English. So it took some while before it was eventually ready for publication, but it was published by June Press in 2014. However, they were a very small company they've now closed down, following the retirement of Keith Carson, their excellent editor. They've closed down, and they never had the resources to publicise the book. So although it's never been out of print, it never sold widely. Governments and intelligence agencies, snapped up copies. So people have taken advantage of what I've written, but they've been very careful to not give me the credit, and they've been very careful to not publicise the book. It's not a novel, it's a history, it's an intelligence history. The third edition has just been published in the United States by Author House. That's important because the United States is the largest market, and June Press found it very expensive business shipping it to America. The postage cost more than the book. So effectively, the book has not been on the American market. There were copies. I think people were charging huge prices for sort of bootleg copies of Spyhunter. I saw prices of over £200, which was ridiculous. But it's now freely available. It's available as a softback. That's the softback edition. But it's also out in hardback. There's the hardback sitting behind me. And it's also, importantly, available as an ebook, and you can get it on Amazon, but also Barnes and Noble. And I'm hoping to get it into the large bookstores. I've struck a deal whereby we can get books into major stores on a sale or return basis. June Press never had the resources to get the book in on a sale or return deal, and Waterstones and so on simply wouldn't stock it. It's not that easy dealing with major book chains. They have the commercial they have commercial advantage over you.
Well, that's those are the people who get bums on seats, I suppose, for want of a better term. But the point is that how far does this agency, or do you call it an agency, the
I do,
service,
yeah.
go back to? So, are we talking Austro-Hungarian pre-unification of Germany
Well,
stuff?
one of the themes of the book is that German intelligence wasn't shut down at the end of World War One, nor was it shut down at the end of World War Two. The DVD was set up by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris in '43. Now, it is a theme of Spyhunter that there's a continuity in German intelligence going right back to prior to the formation of the German Empire. That was largely an intelligence-driven exercise, and it followed deep dealings between Bavarian intelligence, who were Catholic and close to the Vatican, and the Prussians. So the Prussians and Bavarians got into bed together, and in some cases literally, and that then eventually led to the formation of Germany.
Now we're talking mid-1800s.
Oh yes, absolutely. And you've got the Illuminati and Weishaupt and so on, and there are deep. The German intelligence has deep roots going well back before unification.
And Joseph Farrell's published a couple of books. Oxford scholar, as they say, and he's pushing American President Grant connections with the Prussians way back in the American Civil War. Is this a thread that is going way back, so to speak?
Joseph Farrell has picked up on. He gets close to the truth. He doesn't get actually to the truth, but he gets close to the truth. I've read a number of his books. They're quite interesting. Grant wasn't in bed with the Prussians. The Prussians were backing the South in the Civil War, which Robert E. Lee wasn't a great...
Now, I may have I haven't... there was a connection there which he's published, but I don't. So don't go by what I've just said as being allies.
The Prussians were very much involved in the American Civil War, but they were advising the South. So Robert E. Lee had Prussian military advisors, as did the Zulus. Anybody who's fighting the British, the Zulus, the Boers, usually had Prussian military advisors, and the Prussians were backing the South, which is partly why the North, which had so much more population and resources in the South, found it a struggle to defeat them.
And also maybe an assassination of a president at that era?
Well, the Prussians set up the assassination of Lincoln, and they knew what they were doing. The ramifications of the Lincoln assassination rumbled on for a century.
And as to why he got done in the first place?
Well, the Germans were keen to, certainly keen to cause strife in America, and they were particularly keen to cause racial strife, and they were very worried about Lincoln's approach to reunification of the country and not lording it over the South.
I mean, the bottom line here is, Michael, is that the elephant in the room here is sitting on the front cover of your book, i.e., a leading former president of the United States.
Well, yes, I don't know if we can we see the cover of the book?
It's on the big screen there.
Right, yes. One of the foremost DVD agents in recent years was George H.W. Bush, who, as you rightly say, was President of the United States. His elder brother, Prescott Bush Jr., was a DVD agent, and their father, Prescott Bush Sr., was also a DVD agent. He originally started out, of course, with the Abwehr, headed by Admiral Canaris. Now, he is the chap in the top photo on the cover of the book. Now,
I gather he was very careless, Michael. Mr. Canaris. He died several times.
Well, yes,
Bit of a
to
bummer,
die
that.
once, yes, to die once, I'm going to misquote Oscar Wilde here. Yes, to die twice is a little bit careless. Now, he faked his death in 1945 along with Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo. So at the end of World War II, you have the head of the Abwehr, German intelligence, the head of the Gestapo faking their deaths. And this new agency had been set up in 1943, and they just carry on. Canaris moved to Spain. I'm not quite sure where Muller ended up. He might have gone to Spain as well. And then he ended up in East Germany. Canaris has two graves. The fake grave, which is, I think, in West Germany, and the real grave, which is in what used to be East Germany. And one of my sources visited both graves. He knew Canaris during the war, before the war, and after the war.
Excellent. Okay, so we're sort of maybe jumping ahead of ourselves here. So let's get into the history of really how you got the book written. And did you have suddenly a lot of time on your hands suddenly?
Yes, in 2010, I was made bankrupt in 2010 by a slightly dodgy firm of solicitors, no offence intended, who got into bed with GCHQ. An Iranian agent, the Iranians, I discovered the DVD in 98 during the battle for Rolls-Royce. They tried to murder me and obviously failed, although they left me with a lifelong blood disorder called methemoglobinemia, which can be fatal, thankfully in my case.
I think even trying to say it might be fatal, is it?
Yes, it's not easy to pronounce. And having failed to assassinate me, the Jerrys came up with the bright idea of trying to get me disbarred. And they set up a fake mortgage and moved an Iranian agent using the name Hamid Reza Pardis onto Watermead, where I then lived. Now, I'd saved 25 acres of land, open space for the community, including a lake. And it fell to me to bailiff the lake as effectively the chairman of residence, because Pardis was he was dealing in drugs, and people who were distributing his cocaine and heroin were illegally fishing, and I had to tell them to leave the land. I got threatened, thrown in one of the lakes. There was another lake to the south. I got thrown into one lake, threatened quite repeatedly. And he took advantage of this dispute, which he was egging on, to make a bogus complaint that I had abused him in his restaurant with a loud hailer, which is complete and utter nonsense. Like a lot of crooks, he made the mistake, a bit like Virginia Giuffre in the United States. He made the mistake of forging, in her case, she forged a photo. In his case, he forged a diary. He forged a diary in an effort to bolster his case, which was weak. The diary was exposed as a forgery eventually. The whole case completely collapsed. I got costs against the Bar Council in a record sum then of £40,000, but I was made bankrupt over the balance. And decent solicitors don't normally pursue their clients for the balance of costs where they've won the case, got costs against the other side, and they've had a fairly substantial chunk of money into their account. But I was made bankrupt. I'd been forced by Derry Irvin's successor as Lord Chancellor, Charlie Faulkner, who was a political opponent of mine. Charlie, who was very close to Cherie Blair, suspended me from sitting as the chairman of the Immigration Appeal Tribunal. That was a large source of my income. So what with the total costs of this bogus complaint were about £250,000, and essentially that's what I was made bankrupt for. And I lost the house, I lost my Bentley. Life was turned upside down, but I took advantage of not being able to practice at the bar. I did say to the district judge, you may be bankrupt. Well, I can't practice as a barrister whilst bankrupt without telling solicitors and clients. And he said, of course you can. I said, well, no, sorry, that's dishonourable. I think if you're a barrister, and you've been made bankrupt, you should disclose that to any solicitor sending you work, and the lay client should be told either by you or by the solicitor, but people are entitled to know that. Even if the circumstances that led you to you being made bankrupt are entirely honourable and not your fault. So I wasn't prepared to practice whilst bankrupt. And I moved to stay with a friend in the United States who ran effectively a CIA safe house, and then moved to my family in Australia, and then stayed with friends in New Zealand, and wrote Spyhunter. It took, it's a 300,000 word book. It's 700 pages, and it took a while to write. And of course, there was a lot of research as well. And although I'd done a lot of the research came on, a lot of the research had already been done, but there was more research to be done. And as I say, it took till 2012 before the first version was ready. I'd taken great care to keep it off the internet. Because USNI were going to publish it, I sent the completed manuscript to them, and then all hell broke loose because I'd told the truth about the Kennedy assassination, the kidnap of Amelia, the shoot down of Amelia Earhart, and so on. There was a lot of stuff in there that various bad guys did not want coming out.
Well, I haven't heard of any controversy about assassinating presidents in the United States before, so this was a new thing then.
Well,
obviously the relevant committees and the relevant
well, the DVD
reports.
assassinated, John F. Kennedy was assassinated by the DVD. It's impossible to understand the Kennedy assassination without realizing that John McCone was a loyal American. He was Kennedy's choice to head the CIA, and Alan Walsh Dulles, who Cone replaced, was a German agent. The Dulles brothers had tried to negotiate a separate peace with Germany when they were based in Switzerland in World War II. They were shacked up in an apartment in Bern, and they were negotiating a separate peace with Admiral Canaris, or trying to. I mean, obviously.
But on whose authority were they doing that? I mean, who must have had some clout to be able to negotiate or attempt to negotiate.
Well, yes, they were in bed with J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover had a lot of clout because he had a lot of blackmail material on key people. He probably had blackmail material on Roosevelt, but he certainly had blackmail material on key leading members of the Roosevelt administration. And the link between the Dulles brothers and J. Edgar gave the Dulles brothers considerable leverage. I should explain that Hamid Reza Pardis, who was taken out by MI5 last year, was involved in terrorism. On 7/7, he housed the terrorists at his restaurant, the Riviera on Watermead, and he had they parked their Nissan Micra in the Riviera car park. It was me who spotted that.
Explain that detail, because that meant that they were already in town and didn't need to take any trains into town.
Well, they went across to
7/7.
Luton. They went across to Luton, bought return tickets as they were expecting to come back to Luton, parked their Nissan Micra in the car park with some additional IEDs in the boot, or components of IEDs in the boot, which they were intending to use for a follow-on operation, obviously. They go off to London. But they end up killing themselves. Now, Pardis, I imagine, was in the loop on the decision to have them blown up. The timers, which were probably delivered to the Riviera by Jean-Charles de Menezes, the Brazilian intelligence officer who designed the timers, I imagine Pardis knew full well that the timers he was giving to the terrorists were set to detonate on arming. So they thought they were giving themselves 10 minutes to get away. In fact...
that old trick.
It's an old trick. The timer said 10 minutes. You've got 10 minutes, boys. You're okay. Press the tit. Boom. One terrorist on a bus screams because he's not a suicide terrorist. And they're not wearing backpacks. Sorry, they're not wearing suicide vests. They've got the IEDs in backpacks because they're going to leave them on the trains and then make good their escape. One of them presses the tit. Now, you do get an indication that the explosive is about to go off, and the detonator's made a little bit of a noise, hissing noise, and all of a sudden the terrorist on a bus realizes, oh dear, I've just blown myself up. So there was a fraction of a fraction of a second between him being blown up and him arming the device, during which he's aware that he's effectively killed himself. Hence the scream. Suicide bombers don't normally scream. They shout Allahu Akbar or whatever.
Yeah.
They don't normally scream because they're reconciled to their deaths. These guys weren't.
Do you want an extra cup of tea?
No, that's fine. That's right.
Okay.
Now,
I just thought that was polite to say in the middle of blowing somebody up.
it's very kind of you to offer tea. Pardis almost certainly takes the rig detonators from Jean-Charles de Menezes. The terrorists 2 weeks later, on 21/7, now I got word that there was going to be an attack going down either in London or Chicago. I was in touch with a group of computer scientists based in Cambridge, some of whom have been involved in the development of the internet. And they were monitoring the dark web. Al-Qaeda then were using the dark web to communicate. And we picked up a fragment of a code. It's one of the problems with intelligence work, ladies and gentlemen. You get fragments of intercepts, a little bit like the Americans at Midway, where Edwin Leighton, the brilliant intelligence officer for the US Pacific Fleet, was working on fragments. He was getting 25%, whatever, of the Japanese naval traffic. And he had to build a picture based on fragments. Well, we had a fragment. We had Al-Qaeda were using 3-letter city codes. We had 2 out of the 3 letters consistent with either London or Chicago. So I got rung up by Chicago PD. Chicago PD were interested, and I said, look, I think you've got Al-Qaeda in town, but we can't be sure. It may be you, it may be London. This is reliable intelligence, and you should treat it as, confidence is fairly high. And indeed, there was Al-Qaeda activity in Chicago. Chicago PD found an Al-Qaeda reconnaissance cell. They were reconnoitering the Chicago L, or Elevated Railroad, and they were intending to blow it up. And what they were looking for was critical junctions, so they would cause maximum disruption to mass transit in Chicago. So Chicago PD were very pleased. The Met got into a lather of anxiety, and I had a special branch officer charge up A41 to come and see me. At about midnight, he hammered on the door, as special brancher want to do, demanding to be let in. Well, he didn't have to hammer the door, he had to ring the doorbell. My door's always open to special branch Miles, and MI5, and MI6, and the Defense Intelligence Staff, and the CIA, and the NSA, and Mossad. He just had to ask nicely. He was rather rude to start with. And then I let him in and offered a cup of tea. Knew he was driving, so I didn't offer a drink. I said, come in. I think he was a detective sergeant. I said, come in. And I think as soon as he walked in the door, well, as soon as he came into my lounge, he realized that, oh, I think this guy may be a serious intelligence specialist, because my dining room table was completely covered in maps and books and what have you. And there were, I am an intelligence specialist, and I'd started to teach at the American Military University. And there were, the whole room was just full of books about defense, intelligence journals, naval journals, you name it. And anyone walking into the room would realize, okay, right, This guy's a bit of a player. And I had, my walls were surrounded by aeroplane prints, including 2 signed by Bomber Harris, 1 signed by Bill Reed, VC. So I had prints on the wall of bombers signed by a VC. Bomber Harris had signed 2 of them. And I think that took him aback. Anyway, he calmed down. And I think he realised, uh-oh, I think Michael's got a point. And I said, look, we can't be certain whether it's you or Chicago. I explained that I hadn't rung Chicago PD. He said, why did you ring Chicago PD? I said, no, they rang me. And they were prompted to ring me by a mutual friend, a Major General who was in Delta Force, or had been in Delta Force, and had been one of the American commandos down in the Falklands. Well, not many people know that there were American ground troops involved in the Falklands War, actually on the ground.
There must have been a much wider story about that.
Oh yes, absolutely. But it's all in the book. And I said, look, they rang me, which they had. And I said, look, I think you've got a problem. Now we can't be sure it's London. It could be Chicago. The boys in Chicago are picking up Al-Qaeda activity on the ground, but I've advised them that it's a reconnaissance cell. I don't think it's an attack cell. Al-Qaeda had reconnaissance cells who would set the mission up, and then they had attack cells. And I knew this very well because I'd represented at law Joe Lowry, the CIA officer investigating the payments to the reconnaissance cell who were doing 9/11, preparing the groundwork. And Al-Qaeda were quite thorough. They always sent in a recon cell ahead of any major attack. And I said, look, I think we've got a problem. I think the target's the underground, and the indications are it's going down on the 22nd. Well, it did go down on the 22nd. The detective sergeant was ignored, and Londoners on the underground were exposed to deadly danger, thanks to the incompetence of senior officers in charge at the Met, or thanks to political pressure from the Cabinet Office. Now, nobody died because the terrorists smelt a rat. They weren't suicide bombers. They knew they weren't suicide bombers. You know if you're going to blow yourself up. And they'd smelt a rat from 7/7, and they were right. So what they did was they pulled the detonators, and you have a series of small explosions as they set the detonators off. And of course, what they're doing is they think they're exactly as on 7/7. They think they've got 10 minutes to get away. Oh dear. De Menezes, as soon as he realises the terrorists are alive, suddenly clicks and thinks, oh dear, I've now got a very annoyed Al-Qaeda terrorist cell after me because they know I've designed the timers and they know I've rigged them. De Menezes then leaves his flat in fear of his life, carrying a concealed Makarov silenced pistol. Now, some listeners may know, or viewers may know, that the Makarov has an integral silencer. In other words, it's quite bulky. It's not one that you can unscrew. It's quite bulky. It was under his jacket. It was mistaken for an IED. The National Security Agency, to whom I used to report, or still do in reality, rang that afternoon saying, Michael, why do your guys take down De Menezes? I said, well, I think they thought he was a suicide bomber. He wasn't. I said, I know that, you know that. But they had reason to believe that he was. And then I suddenly realised, oh, hang on a minute, they've circulated his details, which they had after he was shot. And I suddenly realised, you boys have a file on him. No comment, Michael. I said, oh, interesting. I then found out that he had been trained by the CIA at a facility in New York and had gone walkies. He'd been trained between 2000 and 2002 in the manufacture of timers. The original intent, he was a Brazilian intelligence officer. They were going to use him to blow up bales of cocaine in Bolivia and elsewhere. And no doubt Colombia as well. And he'd gone walkies, he'd gone rogue, and he designed the timers for Madrid. And as soon as the timers, details of the timers for London, the 2 London ops were circulated, people were doing comparisons and realised, aha, the same bomb maker that did London also did Madrid. And then that was 2007, 7 and 21/7. And then Pardis, which wasn't his real name, but that was the alias he was using, Pardis then becomes the quartermaster to the liquid bomb plot. Because he'd come after me with a manufactured complaint, MI5 were checking him out because I used to pass stuff to MI5. And Pardis was storing binary liquid explosives. MI5 got onto him and then were very interested in a bunch of Al-Qaeda turning up from High Wycombe. MI5 wanted to know, well, what are these guys doing with Pardis? And what's this about liquids? Because MI5 followed the cell back to High Wycombe. They were burying the explosives separately in a wood near Wycombe, High Wycombe. And 5 got small samples of these liquids and took them to their top plastics man, who happened to be a friend of mine. And I think I'd give his first name as Derek. And they said, Derek, we're a bit puzzled. We've got 2 liquids here, but they seem to be harmless. I gather, I wasn't there. I've never actually been inside Thames House, MI5 headquarters. But I can picture the scene. As soon as they said we've got 2 separate liquids, Derek said it's a binary explosive. Stick them together and you've got a very powerful explosive, and that of course was the plan. That saved, I suppose, about 15,000 lives. So I wasn't too... Yeah, I wasn't too.
Well, that's a big bang.
I wasn't too upset about being made bankrupt. I mean, if any viewers have ever saved a life, perhaps in the military, you've saved the life of a comrade, or you're a policeman and you've saved a life, saved a child from drowning, you feel good about yourself. You tend to have a relaxed outlook on life. Somebody quoted in the Knesset during President Trump's recent triumphant visit. Turned out not to be such a great triumph once he'd left Israel, but it was certainly a triumphant reception. And I think it was the speaker or the leader of the opposition quoted, if you save one life, you save the world. And saving the 15,000 lives potentially saved by exposure to the liquid bomb plot, which wouldn't have happened if Pardis hadn't come after me, and MI5 would then monitor him, was a big win. Same with prison. I was banged up in prison for 6 months, but I was banged up with a suicidal South Korean rapist, allegedly. I think that's quite demeaning. I mean, surely you needed to be banged up with a North Korean rapist. Well, he was South Korean. He was South Korean. He was a Catholic. He was a very nice man. And I concluded pretty quickly, although he didn't speak much English, I concluded pretty quickly it had been set up. The allegation had come from his wife. She wanted a divorce. And it all smelt to high heaven. And he was supposed to have raped his kids, both boy and girl, but they couldn't say in which country this had happened. Well, I have to tell you, Miles, if you've been raped, you know it.
Vaguely know.
It's very difficult to rape someone unless you're using a date rape drug and they're unconscious. But if they're conscious, they're going to know it. And they're going to know which country it happened in. I mean, it's not the sort of thing you ignore or forget. And I looked at that and applied my forensic mind to this and thought, I'm not buying this. I think this poor man's been set up. So I was helping him with his case. And then I was watching TV in the cell. I quite like the old ITV. You couldn't get that much TV in the cells, and they weren't exactly widescreen tellies, but you had a telly in your cell. And
bloody luxury.
Yeah, well, it was luxury. I mean, they didn't have Sky Sports, and if they're going to bang up members of MCC, the very least you can do, Miles, is put Sky Sports on. So I was watching the Professionals, or might have been Hogan's Heroes. I love Hogan's Heroes. It's huge fun. The Professionals are great. They were doing reruns of the Professionals. Bodie and Doyle. I quite enjoyed the professionals. And it was the sort of TV that you couldn't. I mean, you were there, you were stuck in your cell. Wandsworth, we were in our cells 23 hours out of 24, and it was the sort of TV you never had time to watch when you're working as a barrister. And I was seeing episodes I'd never seen before, and I'd quite happy to have a cup of tea.
Is it really like that?
Watch TV, and then I heard a sound behind me, and then realised he'd strung himself up on the top tier of the bunks. The bunk beds, and I had cut him down. I had to fight him. He was definitely trying to kill himself. Pressed the emergency alarm, but the Wandsworth was short-staffed. It took 10 minutes for somebody to get there. Then the officers got into a huge panic. I mean, all of a sudden, one officer turns up. Then there are about 10. They're trying to save him, and they're sending for medical. They're sending for doctors and so on. And I was basically allowed to wander around the wing. I was the only prisoner out of his cell. They trusted me enough to let me wander around. So I wandered around, let them revive him. But I'd saved his life, or I certainly played a material part in saving his life. And I felt good about that. And I was fairly popular on the wing after that. I mean, I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I'm almost as modest as Donald Trump, so I don't normally blow my own trumpet. But
yes, very modest person.
I'm a very modest person, of course. I'm famously humble. The viewers will have to travel a long way to find an intelligence historian as humble as myself.
Yes.
And I got on pretty well with. I'd like to think I got on pretty well with my fellow prisoners. At any rate, none of them tried to murder me. Of course, in Brixton, I was banged up, as on the cover of the book, I was banged up with Stephen Port, the gay serial killer, only I didn't know I thought he was in prison for a motoring matter. He was in for perverting the course of justice. Nobody said anything about dead bodies. And he was actually let out early with the support of probation and went off to...
What does it say in the cover of the book? Do you want to mention it? It's on the left-hand
yes,
side there.
well, I think it's easiest if I read it there. I was imprisoned, sorry, it's on the cover of the hardcover. I was imprisoned with the notorious serial killer Stephen Port. Yes, it's on the cover.
That's where the photograph is that right?
Yes.
Right.
Anyway, so I was banged up with Stephen Port. I think the cabinet
explain
office
to people
hoped,
about that, the context, because a lot of people won't know.
Well, I think somebody was hoping that he'd murder me, but he turned out to be quite a nice serial killer. He's actually the nicest serial killer I've ever met.
Well, have you met, apart from Christine Joanna Hart, she met a few serial killers, former journal. I wasn't aware that you were in the habit of meeting serial killers.
I don't. Well, in fairness, I don't meet a lot of serial killers. I've met DVD officers, of course, they're into serial killing, including AIDS. This book, the third edition, is an updated edition. I spent quite a bit of time over the summer.
Okay, well, where does the first edition start from, and where does the first two editions?
The first two editions essentially start from. Well, there's a pre-45 history, so they essentially cover the history of German intelligence in Victorian times. They cover the sinking of the Titanic, which was set up by German naval intelligence, the Amelia Earhart shoot-down and so on. So the first part of the book goes up to 1945, and then it takes the history forward with the DVD set up in 43, but it only takes it up to the end of Obama's first term, roughly, because I'd written the book by 2012. Between 2012 and 2014, it was more a question of translating it from American back into English and correcting the proofs and so on.
Michael, God damn it, what do you mean this English-American problem?
Well, obviously, I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek. I appreciate that America is an English-speaking country, but we like to have our we Poms like to have our little joke about.
You goddamn limey. Am I suitably?
I'm saying tongue in cheek. We translated it from American back into English.
Right.
I
But is
feel
there
out
code
that
for other
officially
things
America is an English-speaking country.
But are there other undertones that you're trying to embed there? That maybe there's certain things that were in the book that you needed or didn't need, or what?
Well, there's quite a lot of stuff in the book.
I mean, apart from shooting down comets and things like that.
Yes, I mean the shoot down, the sabotage of the de Havilland Comet airliners in 1954. Well, again, that's something that embarrasses German intelligence even now. And of course, the DVD have a specialist sabotage unit, so they are involved in all sorts of things, including reverse engineering and manufacture of the AIM-54 Phoenix missile, which the Iranians named the Fakur-2, which they used to shoot down 2 Airbuses. And then it was used by the Chinese to shoot down a Malaysian airliner over the South China Sea, which had to be hushed up. And there was an absurd pretense that it had flown all the way down to the southern Indian Ocean, which it couldn't have done. It didn't have enough fuel on board. And the Malaysians aren't stupid. They don't put 100% fuel on board an airliner that's only flying to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur. The plane had 15% reserves max, probably less because Malaysia were struggling at the time and fuel was expensive. Probably only had 10% emergency reserves, and but even on the generous allowance of 15%, it simply didn't have enough fuel left after its manoeuvring to avoid the missile.
Okay, so I've obviously got a copy here of your first bracket second edition.
Yes.
What's the big deal? Why should anybody who's got the first edition or second edition go out and buy this edition?
Because it's been updated. It's not.
Now,
it's
what's
not,
it been updated with?
Exactly. It covers it right up to the present day. So it takes the story forward another.
And we're talking about Starmer still in power and Boris Johnson not.
Exactly.
And Liz Truss taken out by a coup d'etat. Are you going that far?
Yeah. I think I cover the Liz Truss coup. It brings events forward to the present day, so it's considerably updated and improved.
And so
let's
go into
the second
those.
edition. It's still worth buying the third edition. And of course, if you don't want to shell out for the soft copy or the hard copy, you can always get an e-book.
I always think that these computers are very unreliable. Somebody could rewrite the text, surely.
I'm not I do have a Kindle
Google
reader.
have done
I mean, e-books have
Allegedly.
their place. I mean, there are one of the nice things about e-books, particularly if you're travelling, is that you only have to take your Kindle reader,
Well, yes.
and you can get an awful lot of, as anybody who uses Kindle will know, you can get an awful lot of reading material onto a Kindle. So
But
I
the
prefer
argument
prefer good old-fashioned. Give me a good old-fashioned print book any day of the week, but I concede that e-books have their place, and there are definite advantages to reading books on Kindle.
But they can have the words changed. Some authors have complained about that, but that's another thing.
Yeah, well, it's software, so theoretically it could be sabotaged, but there's no indication that Spyhunter has been sabotaged.
Okay. So, what? I mean, you haven't mentioned in this chat about nukes and the London Olympics and things. So that's all in the first.
That's in the book. Bear in mind that the book was seized in April 2012. At the time that I was warning that there was intelligence of an impending nuclear attack on the London Olympics. But I've made it clear in the book that the intelligence which had come from Russia was accurate.
And that involved a cursed submarine, didn't it?
Well, yes, the Germans had sabotaged the submarine Kursk in August 2000, and then Germany becomes a nuclear-armed power. which was a hugely serious development. We in the West then developed a counter to concealed nuclear weapons, because the German intent was obviously to smuggle weapons into target cities. Well, they smuggled 2 into London, the primary and the backup. They were both off the Kursk. Fortunately, the Americans and the Canadians had developed something called muon scattering tomography, which was a active sensor.
That's easy for you to say.
It's a sensor that could penetrate boron impregnated plastic shielding, which was used by the DVD to conceal the nukes. And thanks to MST, the Americans were able, I think it was mounted on a satellite, they were able to locate the backup device, which I didn't know about. The warning only related to the primary device. The primary device was recovered from an ocean-going Type 21 U-boat, which was sunk by the US Navy in the Indian Ocean. It's quite dramatic. It would make there are any filmmakers listening. The whole story involving U-boats, nuclear weapons, and SEAL Team 6 and so on would make quite a dramatic story.
A sort of an update to Ice Station Zebra.
It was it's funny you should say that, but one of the joys of being an intelligence historian is you know that so much, you know a lot of stuff that's been kept quiet, and you know that things can get quiet. And I mean, if it's the same with James Bond films. I could Thunderball. I love Thunderball because it's a hunt for a nuclear weapon. Well, I've done hunts for nuclear weapons. It's like,
was that taken from what do you call it, the V
well,
weapon?
Ian Fleming, as I explained in the book, Ian Fleming was a British intelligence officer. He was brilliant. He was very, very good.
As was Roald Dahl.
Virtually his whole adult life, he was spent in intelligence. When he was in Germany for Reuters, I think he was covering for Reuters. He was actually spying for MI6. But he was also involved in a much more secretive network than MI6, because MI6 had penetrated, and the head of MI6 in World War II, Sir Stuart Minges, was a German spy. So we had to set up an agency above MI6 that wasn't penetrated. That was, in fact, called MI18. And Ian Fleming was an intelligence officer with MI18. Now, he picked up the DVD. It's the inspiration for his fictional Spectre. And Blofeld is the Canaris is the inspiration for Blofeld, and the 00 section is a play on GO2, the German operation in London.
How interesting.
Oh yes, I mean it's a question of art imitating life.
So
I watch a Bond film, and I really engage. I mean, I engage with Thunderball. Love watching it. Watched it so many times. But it's just great fun. I can just put my feet up for an hour and a half and just get lost in the plot and enjoy it, knowing that this is precisely the sort of thing that actually happens in real life. Anybody thinks the Bond films are way out and wacky, and the plots are impossible, needs to experience, to get involved in an operation up against the DVD.
Well, have you seen the final one that they had?
Oh, I watched all the Bonds.
With Daniel Craig and all that.
Oh, yes. My favourite Bond, my favourite Bond film is actually On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yes.
I know a lot. I know it's become more
Diana
popular.
Rigg has a very unhappy end, which I gather happened in real life.
I mean, that's upsetting. I mean, it's a film. But the whole point of cinema is that you lose yourself and you engage in the film, and you engage with the characters. And the final scene in On Her Majesty's Secret Service is upsetting. Even when you've seen the film dozens of times, you know what's going to happen. It's still upsetting.
Well, I got information that she was actually taken out, Diana Rigg.
I've not worked on her case, so I don't have any specifics on that.
Unhappy about that.
I do know there was a lot of interference. I can tell you now that the Germans attempted to murder Cubby Broccoli.
Why would they do a thing like that?
Well,
Decent
the Germans
Italian.
were very upset
They
with
didn't
Ian
like the
Fleming. They
spaghetti.
murdered Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming was murdered in '63. They had an induced heart. The Germans induced a heart attack, and Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli were due to fly back to England on the BOAC 707-436, which was blown up over Mount Fuji. Now, somebody clearly got word of that operation. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman knew the plane was going to be blown up, but somebody got a warning to them. It looks, the facts are a bit murky, but it looks as though somebody in Japanese intelligence picked up the Jerrys were going to blow up a British Boeing 707 flying to London. They were trying to stop You Only Live Twice because they were out there scouting locations. And they were offered a deal to go and visit a ninja facility, which they'd been trying to set up and hadn't. And they were offered a deal that was too good to turn down. So they postponed the flight. I don't think they were in the loop. I don't think they realized they were saving their lives by postponing the flight. As with all these operations, it had been set in train weeks before, or certainly days before. It was too late. The change of plan was very late in the day. It was too late for the Germans to get the bomb off the plane. It's then blown up over Mount Fuji. There's a completely facetious explanation about air currents, fatigue, and the aeroplane suddenly breaks up over Mount Fuji, as though aeroplanes, like aeroplanes are breaking up over Mount Fuji all the time. The official explanation is Janet and John nonsense.
Now, there was another flight.
You'd have to be a child or a High Court judge to fall for it.
There was another flight that crashed just coming into Heathrow, 777.
Oh, that was BA-38. Yeah, that's in the book.
Apparently Gordon Brown was meant to be on that flight.
Yes, he was. That was sabotaged. That was software sabotage. The official explanation was that the fuel had frozen. Well, the 777 has a fuel low temperature warning light. That was never activated. Boeing confirmed that to me. Because the records with modern aircraft, you can tell if a warning light's been activated, even if the warning light goes out. The fact that it's been activated, you plug your laptop into the software, and you find you find out what warnings have gone off during the flight. The fuel low temperature warning light never activated. The aircraft didn't fly through particularly cold air.
But I mean, without putting too mild a point on things, aeroplanes are flying up there and it gets cold.
Well, the Germans are targeting Boeing at the moment, and so we've had a series of incidents involving Boeing aircraft, none of which are the fault of the manufacturer. This is the DVD having a go at Boeing in favour of Airbus. But Flight 38 was definitely sabotaged.
So what happened? What happened then exactly? Then okay, it was the pilot just managed to get a couple of meters more, and that was enough.
The Germans were yeah. The fact that everybody walked off the plane, nobody should think that was the plan. The plan was for the plane to undershoot, and I think the Germans are probably hoping it would crash on the M25. The fact that everybody walked off the plane was down to brilliant flying. Nobody was intended to survive Flight 38. Everybody was meant to die in a blazing fireball. The pilots stretched the glide. Now, most modern pilots are not used to gliding. Most modern pilots, if they've got a double-engine failure on a twin-engine jet, they've got no power, either panic or they just don't have they don't have the sheer airmanship skills.
Well, they're trying to de-skill the pilots like hell.
Yeah.
But, what was the bottom line on that? Or do we need to read the book, Michael?
Yeah, well, everybody should read the book, absolutely. The pilots brilliantly stretched the glide, and they got the plane onto the field. Now, they weren't able to make the runway, but you can't blame
even
them
if
for
they
that.
landed on the bloody
power.
road, it would have been a disaster. I mean, the fact that the undercarriage, hit the muddy, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't down to luck. It was down to the skill of the pilots. And I actually intervened to protect the pilot. There was a plan to sack the pilot. and I intervened on his behalf
Why
very
were they
quietly.
second? I mean,
I can't. I think I intervened with both British Airways, and I had some contacts with BA, and I intervened with the British Airline Pilots Association and said, "Look, the plane was sabotaged." I was able to confirm sabotage with the Taiwanese. If you want to find out what's happening in Peking, don't bother asking anybody in Peking. Ask Taipei. They have a very good network in China. And I asked about the band, because Gordon Brown was supposed to be on the flight. The idea was that there'd be a huge crash, lots of people dead, and Gordon Brown would not make it to Peking. He was having certain meetings that the Chinese leadership didn't want him to have, meetings of a financial character. And there was a band that had been booked to play the national anthem and so on. So I made inquiries of the boys in Taipei and said, "What happened to the band?" And their word came back and said, "Michael, you were right." I said, the band was stood down before the plane crashed. I said, "Yeah, of course it was. They knew it was going to crash." It's the sort of little detail point that people miss. So they're planning a mass murder.
Those are the kind of detail
they're
points.
planning a mass murder, and they save a bit of money or save a bit of time. They stand the band down early. So the band was stood down before the plane crashed. In other words, everybody in Peking knew the plane wasn't going to, the Gordon Brown wasn't going to make it.
That's being trifling overconfident.
Yes, but bad guys often get overconfident. I mean, they're the bad guys. So they tend to suffer from personality flaws like arrogance. They're not humble like myself.
I've never noticed that in any of our leaders of these years. So the bottom line
Keir
is...
Starmer certainly isn't humble, though he's got a lot to be humble about. No offence intended.
We're living in very dreadful times. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, indeed.
I mean, this is happening not in this country. It's happening... I mean, Germany wants to leave the EU, I think, and so does Italy, and they want to go to this...
Well, I think the EU is finished. I think it's a question of time. The Italians are certainly getting restive. Immigration is a big issue in Italy. It is here as well. But it's particularly big in Italy with Lampedusa and so on. So the Italians are getting restive, and there's a very strong move in Germany to leave the EU. Alternative for Deutschland are actually doing quite well in the polls. And although they've been blocked from taking power in regional assemblies, they may well end up we may well end up with a alternative for Deutschland chancellor.
Well, I mean, they shut down there's two things Germany did. They didn't really go for electric cars, which was a huge disaster. Electric cars. That's why it's breaking all our roads.
Well, going for electric cars was a huge disaster. Total waste of time and money.
Yeah, because of the battery technology and all that. And the other one is that they shut their biggest steel mill down, so that they can't even make their own steel. Is that?
Well, the problem with steel is the cost of energy, and that's what's crippled the British steel industry, apart from lack of orders. Closing down shipbuilding and so on. But steel is a huge consumer of energy.
Yes.
So the absurd energy price in the UK, which is a reflection of the government's mad commitment to net zero, makes life very difficult for our steel manufacturers. I'm not saying it's the only problem, but there's a definite problem with the price of industrial energy in the UK. Our electricity is far too expensive.
Okay, well, let's get back to the book and let's do sort of a fast round up on the book and what are the big things which are added to it and what are the big wows and why should people buy it?
There are two big things that have been added to it. The Spanish flu. I think I covered Spanish flu a little bit in the first and second editions. But Spanish flu was a WMD.
Which era are we talking about here?
Spanish flu goes
back...
back...
World War One, after World War One.
Well, the Spanish flu goes back to 1918 That's when it was first released, although the Germans had clearly been working on it. And I think they've been working on it. I would say the Germans are working on Spanish flu from the failure to destroy the British fleet at Jutland in 1916. I would think
there's a whole bunch of
program
stories
goes
about
back to
that.
1916.
Including HMS Hood and Bismarck and stuff.
Hood and Bismarck, that's World War II, but that's covered in both editions of the book. The Hood was blown up with an IED planted on the ship by Scottish nationalists. Now, there's been an interesting postscript to that. Coming back to Spanish flu hits, it's released on the Western Front, aimed at fit young men, i.e. troops, and it was timed with Ludendorff's spring offensive. So the Germans are very much intending to use, they did use Spanish flu as a force multiplier for their spring offensive in 1918. Now it fails, Germany loses the war, but because we don't shut down German intelligence or break up Germany, they're able to carry on with their WMD campaign, and they ended up murdering between 75 and 100 million people. It's the single biggest crime in history. And it was me who partly was responsible for
So what was the principal function of that flu that killed
Well, I
so
think
many
the Germans
people?
are just taking revenge and trying to wreck the economies of the victorious Allies. I think it was the largest hissy fit in history. The Germans punishing the West for winning.
But does
So
that
tens of millions of people died.
Yes.
For no obvious strategic purpose other than it weakened the West.
Does this have a important lesson for the way things have happened in the last 5 years, shall we say?
Yes, apart from anything else, in the third edition I point out that AIDS is a WMD program. Started by Mengele at Dachau concentration camp, because he had the advantage, in inverted commas, of killing live subjects. Medical research is a lot easier, less ethical, but it's a lot easier if you can kill your patients. If you've got live human subjects and you regard them as Untermenschen, that they're inferior human beings, and you're allowed to get away with murdering them, you're able to make much more rapid progress.
Well, there's a bit interesting bunch of papers. I've got the books here by the Pfizer papers released by Naomi Wolf. But that's all about the EU knowing a lot of stuff, that they knew this drug would cause problems.
Yeah, I haven't followed that. I do cover COVID, of course,
Yes.
which is a Chinese bioweapon.
Are you
So
allowed to mention that word yet on television?
Yeah. COVID is a Chinese bioweapon. It was developed with the assistance of Dr. Fauci at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But it is.
And you're able to say
WMD.
that with complete impunity of being banned by YouTube forever and ever and ever.
Sorry, who risks being banned?
Well, if you say anything about this subject, there's certain people at YouTube ban you.
Yeah, I mean, you
You
tell
have
the
to
truth about
immediately publish
COVID.
this only on Rumble or something.
Yeah, look, tell the truth about COVID. You're not going to be very popular, but I like to tell the truth. Well, I do tell the truth.
Well, cutting to the chase, what was the main issue about this horrendous emergency that they're trying to even push on us again at this time in October 2025?
Sorry, which emergency?
Well, they're trying to people aren't being told to start wearing masks again. They're trying to all that sort of stuff. Do you want to?
That seems to be just overblown nonsense.
So, I mean, in terms of the climate, a few years ago, which pushed this whole thing on us all, there's talk that it was deliberately skewed to cause a great harm to the Western Europeans, and I think one other group of people, but basically that the rest of them get away with it from the Chinese.
COVID wasn't very. I mean, there's been a lot of talk. The Ukrainians are working on ethnically targeted WMDs, in their case, targeted on people of Russian ethnicity. It's not been easy. It's not as easy to develop as it sounds. It doesn't sound particularly easy, and it isn't. And I don't think the Ukrainians had a working anti-Russian bioweapon.
Apart from the fact that they're also ethically very similar, aren't they? That part of the world, Slavic and all that, no?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is one of the problems the Ukrainians had, that they were trying to target Russians, but they didn't want they didn't want washback on themselves. It's one of the reasons why the Ukrainian war happened, because the Russians are well aware of these developments and wanted to stop them. And
Right.
the labs were at Mariupol, which
Explain
is why
all that,
Mariupol.
and
Yeah.
you got Mr. Bush on the front cover, and what did he do, and all that. There's a whole lot of skullduggery
Well,
involved.
Bush
there.
almost certainly sanctioned the attempt to hit me back in whenever it was, 99, and he was responsible for a number of assassinations. He was eventually taken out, by the way.
Yes, just
he didn't
before he would have.
die of natural causes.
Yes.
Officially, he died of natural causes. He, in fact, died some days before the official date of death, and the causes weren't natural, I can assure you.
Well, I have to ask, if somebody's about to pop their clogs anyway, why go to the effort of actually bumping them off?
Well, I don't think Bush Senior was about to pop his clogs when his clogs were popped. I think he was hoping to carry on for a few more years yet.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. He was getting on a bit, but I mean,
Yeah.
he was very dangerous. He was very smart.
Yes.
And very able,
So he is
but also very dangerous.
supplying money to the Nazis from the bank in New York during World War II.
Oh yes, he was well, not necessarily the Nazis, but certainly
Well,
Canaris and German
yes.
intelligence. Absolutely, absolutely.
And head of the CIA and President of the United States.
Yes. Oh, he was a very successful German agent.
And would you want to round off with any current living? That's a dangerous. I can't ask you to do that.
Well, I'm bound by the laws of libel in England, which are fairly fierce, and the judges tend to sit alone these days without juries. So I have to be very, very careful
Well,
in
don't say
naming
anything you don't
current
want to.
German spies.
Well, finally, Michael, what great pearl of wisdom, apart from England ever actually winning a cricket match, he said, just to annoy you, being from Belfast.
Well, I think England are going to win the Ashes. I predict England will win the Ashes.
Michael's well known for going on stage, listening to the test match in one ear and speaking.
Yes, if there's a test match on, I like to keep up
he'd
to
be
date with the
listening to it
score.
on it, so-
I am a member
Well,
of
that was a
MCC,
bit of
after
a
all.
dig. But finally, really, in all seriousness, are we winning or are we losing?
Oh, I think we're winning. And I'm hoping the publication of the third edition of Spyhunter will help with the cause. But there are some serious issues that need addressing, and there are big risks. We haven't fully dealt with COVID, for example. We know the Chinese are working on new variants of COVID in an attempt to
But
try
there are
and get the West
lots-
shut down again.
Lots of information on how the so-called vaccines have been intentionally interfered with or whatever.
Well, the vaccines.
I mean, I'm talking as a general without saying anything specific, but there is a lot of stuff has been released on it now.
Yeah, the point about vaccines, I'm not anti-vaccine.
Yeah, but it's not- yes, but
I recognise and accept that vaccines are not entirely safe, and the urgency to develop an effective vaccine was such that probably some corners were cut. I'm not saying that in any critical sense, because I don't think there was much option.
But you didn't have the honest, decent people in charge pushing it at the time, did we?
Well, we don't have honest, decent people in charge in the UK, full stop. I mean,
No, really. I'm trying to give people some hope.
Whitehall is run by the Cabinet Office, and the Cabinet Office tend to dictate government policy to the government.
And so what?
Well, so what? It means that Britain is governed not by politicians but by civil servants, which is partly why we're in such a mess.
But are you inferring or implying that there may be some reasons for that?
Oh, the reasons for it, because there's a close relationship between the Cabinet Office and GO2. Jeremy Hayward, who ordered my arrest in 2012, was a GO2 agent. He was the Cabinet Secretary. he was rightly taken out by MI5 in 2018.
Well, I think that's probably it. Any final thing you've not?
No,
you've got this
except I mean, go out and, ladies and gentlemen, go out and buy a copy of my book.
And where can you get the
softback,
book?
hardback, or ebook.
Sorry, but where will you get it?
Get it on Amazon, and I say we're hoping to organise it into the major book chains before Christmas.
Well, Devices Books is one place to get books. It's an amazing little bookshop in Handel House here in Devices, and the Empress of Devices, Jo, is always able to get things very well, very quickly for me. So I think that's it, Michael. Any last final words?
No, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
And thank you very much, Michael Shrimpton, for our 23rd of October 2025. Who knows what's going to happen? Are we going to go war with Russia next week? Well, anyway, that's another big if. And all the best. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.